The summer of 2013 was unfolding in Jacksonville, Florida, with its typical humid air and long, sun-drenched days. For 8-year-old Cherish Perrywinkle, it was a time of childhood innocence, a world that should have been filled with safety and the simple joys of being a little girl. She was a bright, happy child with a future full of promise stretching out before her. On the evening of June 21, 2013, Cherish, along with her mother, Rain Perrywinkle, and her 2 younger sisters, found themselves on a routine shopping trip, a simple errand that would soon spiral into an unimaginable nightmare. The family was facing financial hardships, and a trip to the local Dollar General store was a practical necessity. They had no idea that evil was lurking nearby, waiting for an opportunity to strike. That evening, the ordinary setting of a discount store would become the backdrop for a tragedy that would scar the community and the nation. Cherish was a trusting child, unaware of the dangers that can hide behind a seemingly kind face. Her mother, struggling to provide for her 3 daughters, was focused on making ends meet. The family's vulnerability was a quiet, unspoken fact of their lives, a circumstance that made them a target for a predator skilled in manipulation. The events that were about to transpire would shatter their world, turning a simple shopping excursion into a timeline of terror that would end in the most devastating way possible, forever changing the lives of everyone involved and prompting a re-examination of the systems meant to protect the most innocent among us. The city of Jacksonville, a sprawling metropolis on Florida's coast, was like any other large American city, with its mix of bustling commerce and quiet residential neighborhoods. On that particular Friday night, life went on as usual for most of its residents. Families were having dinner, people were heading out for the weekend, and the rhythms of daily life continued unabated. But inside that Dollar General, a sequence of events was set in motion that would soon command the city's full attention. The Perrywinkle family's simple need for basic necessities would intersect with the sinister intentions of a man who represented the very worst of humanity. This chance encounter, born of desperation on one side and predatory cunning on the other, was the first step on a dark path. The air inside the store was filled with the mundane sounds of commerce. The beeping of cash registers, the chatter of shoppers, the hum of fluorescent lights. For the Perrywinkles, it was just another evening trying to stretch their limited budget. They were a family unit, navigating their challenges together. But their world was about to be invaded by a stranger, a man whose past was a dark tapestry of violence and depravity. The tragic timeline of Cherish Perrywinkle's final hours began not with a violent act, but with a quiet, deceptive conversation in the aisle of a store. A conversation that would lead an innocent child away from the safety of her family and into the hands of a monster. The night was young, but the shadows were already gathering. Inside the Dollar General, a man named Donald James Smith approached Rain Perrywinkle. He was 56 years old and he presented himself as a kind and generous stranger. He observed the family's financial struggles and saw an opportunity. Smith told Rain that he had a Walmart gift card with a significant balance on it, and he offered to use it to buy clothes for her and her daughters. For a mother struggling to provide for her children, this offer seemed like an incredible act of kindness, a moment of unexpected relief from her constant financial worries. She saw a helpful man, not a dangerous predator who had been released from jail only weeks before. Smith's offer was the bait, carefully designed to win her trust and gain access to her children. Rain Perrywinkle, wanting to give her daughters the new clothes they needed, accepted the seemingly generous offer. Smith then drove the family in his white van to a nearby Walmart supercenter. The drive itself was a critical step in his plan, moving the family to a larger, more chaotic environment where a child could more easily be separated from her guardian. During the drive and their time in the store, Smith continued his charade of a benevolent stranger, making casual conversation and reinforcing the illusion that he was there to help. Rain, focused on the shopping and grateful for the assistance, remained unaware of the grave danger her family was in. The white van, an ordinary vehicle, had become a tool in a meticulously planned abduction. Once inside the sprawling Walmart, the group began to shop. The store was busy, filled filled with late-night shoppers and the vast, brightly lit aisles of merchandise. Smith walked with the family, continuing his act of generosity. He promised to buy them not just clothes, but food and other necessities. This act of grooming was calculated to lower Rain's defenses completely. By appearing to be a benefactor, he made himself seem trustworthy and non-threatening. All the while, his true intentions were focused solely on 8-year-old Cherish. He was patiently waiting for the perfect moment to isolate her from her mother and sisters, using the distraction of shopping as his cover. The predator's plan was chillingly effective. He used the family's poverty as a weapon against them, exploiting a mother's desire to provide for her children. The promise of free clothes and food was too good to pass up for someone in Rain's position. She believed she had encountered a good Samaritan, a rare moment of fortune in a difficult life. She could not have known that Donald Smith was a registered sex offender with a long and violent history. His offer was not an act of charity, it was a carefully constructed trap. The Walmart, a place familiar to families everywhere, was about to become the scene of a horrifying crime, all set in motion by a deceptive promise. As the shopping trip inside the Walmart continued, Donald Smith laid the final part of his trap. He told Rain Perrywinkle that the gift card he was using had a larger balance than he initially thought. He suggested that he and Cherish could go to the McDonald's located at the front of the store to get some cheeseburgers while Rain and her other 2 daughters finished their shopping. He promised they would be right back. To a mother who had been lulled into a false sense of security over several hours, this request may not have immediately sounded alarm bells. Smith had spent the evening building a foundation of trust, and this was the moment he chose to exploit it. Cherish, likely excited by the prospect of a treat, willingly went with the man she had been told was helping her family. The last time Rain Perrywinkle saw her daughter alive was near that in-store McDonald's. Surveillance footage from Walmart, timed at 10:41 p.m., captured the haunting image of Donald Smith leading the small, trusting 8-year-old by the hand toward the exit. Cherish, wearing a bright orange shirt and flip-flops, looked like any other child heading for a late-night snack. But instead of walking to the McDonald's counter, Smith led her straight out of the store's front doors and into the darkness of the parking lot. They disappeared from the camera's view, walking toward Smith's white van. The abduction was complete. It was executed quietly and deceptively, without any struggle or outcry, in the middle of a busy superstore. Back inside the store, the minutes began to tick by. Rain finished her shopping, but Smith and Cherish did not return as promised. At first, she may have thought they were simply delayed, but as more time passed, a growing sense of panic began to set in. The large, impersonal space of the Walmart, once a place of promised generosity, now felt vast and threatening. She started searching, her calls for Cherish echoing unanswered through the aisles. The realization that something was terribly wrong washed over her. The man who had seemed so kind and helpful had vanished, and he had taken her daughter with him. The friendly stranger had revealed his true, monstrous nature. At approximately 11 o'clock p.m., a frantic and terrified Rain Perrywinkle called 911. In a panicked voice, she told the operator that her daughter had been taken by a stranger. She explained the events of the evening, from the meeting at the Dollar General to the deceptive offer of food at McDonald's. She gave a description of the man and his white van. The call marked the official start of the law enforcement response, a race against time to find a missing child who was in the gravest danger imaginable. The unthinkable had happened. A little girl had been lured away from her family under the guise of kindness, and now she was gone. When Rain Perrywinkle's desperate 911 call came in, the clock was already ticking. Officers from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office were dispatched and arrived at the Walmart at 11:18 p.m. Their first and most crucial task was to verify the mother's story and gather evidence. They immediately went to the store's security office to review the surveillance footage. The video confirmed Rain's account in chilling detail. The officers watched the clear images of Donald Smith, a man they would soon identify as a known predator, leading Cherish by the hand out of the store. The footage provided an undeniable record of the abduction, giving police a face, a name, and a clear timeline of the crime. The search was no longer for a lost child, it was a hunt for a kidnapper. Despite the clear evidence of an abduction captured on video, a critical and tragic error occurred in the initial response. The case was not immediately classified as an abduction by a stranger, which is the necessary trigger for an Amber Alert. Instead, it was initially handled by dispatchers as a standard missing child case. This misclassification caused a catastrophic delay in broadcasting the alert to the public and to law enforcement agencies across the state. An Amber Alert is designed to use the eyes and ears of the public as a force multiplier in the urgent search for a kidnapped child. Every minute that passed without the alert was a minute lost. A missed opportunity to potentially spot Smith's white van and save Cherish's life. The hours crawled by in the darkness of the night, while law enforcement worked to track down their suspect. But the wider public remained unaware of the danger. Without the Amber Alert, there were no messages on highway signs, no notifications on cell phones, and no alerts breaking into television and radio broadcasts. The powerful system designed specifically for cases like this remained silent. The internal procedures and communication failures within the sheriff's office meant that the urgency of the situation was not escalated to the level required. This delay would later become a major point of public outrage and internal investigation, as it highlighted a systemic failure at the worst possible moment. It was not until 4:21 a.m. on June 22nd, more than 6 hours after Cherish was taken, that an Amber Alert was finally issued for her. By then, Donald Smith had a significant head start, having driven away into the night with the innocent child. The alert finally blasted out Cherish's picture, her description, and the information about Smith's white van. The public was at last enlisted in the search, but precious time had been squandered. The 6-hour gap between the abduction and the alert represented a window of opportunity that had tragically closed. The search for Cherish Perrywinkle had become a desperate race against a clock that had been ticking for far too long. The man who lured Cherish Perrywinkle from the Walmart was no ordinary criminal. He was a predator with a long and disturbing history known to the justice system. Donald James Smith, 56 years old at the time of the abduction, was a registered sex offender. His criminal record was a terrifying chronicle of violence against the vulnerable, stretching back decades. He had a prior conviction for a similar crime in 1977 and another in 1993. These were not minor offenses. They were serious crimes that demonstrated a clear and repeating pattern of predatory behavior. The system had identified him as a danger, yet he was free to walk among the public and plot his next horrific act. Just weeks before he encountered the Perrywinkle family, Donald Smith had been released from jail. He was arrested for impersonating a law enforcement officer, but due to a series of procedural oversights, he was released on his own recognizance. Critically, he was not under any form of post-release supervision, probation, or monitoring. This meant there was no one officially keeping track of his activities. He was a known, high-risk offender who had been allowed to slip through the cracks of the criminal justice system. This loophole in the law would later become a focal point of intense scrutiny and public fury, as it revealed a system that was failing to adequately manage its most dangerous predators after their release. As soon as police at the Walmart reviewed the surveillance video and identified the suspect, they knew exactly who they were looking for. Smith's identity and his extensive criminal history were quickly pulled up. The search immediately intensified, transforming from a missing person case into a manhunt for a known and extremely dangerous felon. Law enforcement agencies were put on high alert, and Smith's name and photograph were circulated. They knew his history, they knew his methods, and they knew that the child with him was in extreme peril. The manhunt was not just about apprehending a fugitive. It was a desperate attempt to rescue Cherish before it was too late. The unmasking of Donald Smith sent a shockwave through the community and law enforcement. How could a man with such a violent past be free, unsupervised, and able to commit such a crime? The public was horrified to learn that the system designed to protect them from men like Smith had failed so profoundly. He was not a stranger who appeared out of nowhere. He was a documented threat who had been caught and released multiple times. His ability to approach a family in a public place and carry out his evil plan exposed a terrifying vulnerability in society. The predator had a name and a face, and his history was a testament to a broken system. Once the delayed Amber Alert was finally issued in the early morning hours of June 22nd, the search for Donald Smith's white van escalated dramatically. Tips began to come in as the public became aware of the desperate situation. Law enforcement officers across northeastern Florida were on high alert, patrolling highways and major roads. The manhunt was now a top priority for every officer on duty. At around 9 o'clock in the morning, an officer spotted a white van, matching the description, traveling south on Interstate 95. The officer pulled the van over, and the driver was immediately identified as Donald James Smith. He was alone in the vehicle. Cherish was nowhere to be seen. Smith was taken into custody without a struggle. His arrest was swift, but the most important question remained unanswered. Where was Cherish? Investigators began an intensive interrogation, desperate to get any information that could lead them to the little girl. At the same time, a massive ground search was launched, focusing on the areas between the Walmart where Cherish was taken and the location on I-95 where Smith was apprehended. Police, K-9 units, and volunteers scoured woods, waterways, and remote areas, praying they would find her alive. The entire community held its breath, hoping for a miracle while fearing the worst. The clock had been ticking for over 10 hours. The search led investigators to a quiet wooded area behind Highlands Baptist Church in northern Jacksonville. There, in a shallow, marshy creek, searchers made the most devastating discovery imaginable. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, they found the body of 8-year-old Cherish Perrywinkle. The hope that had sustained the community and law enforcement through the frantic night and morning was extinguished in an instant. The search for a missing child had ended in the recovery of a murder victim. The scene was secured, and a painstaking investigation began to collect the evidence that would be used to bring her killer to justice. The heartbreaking discovery confirmed everyone's deepest fears. The news of Cherish's death sent a wave of grief and rage through Jacksonville and across the nation. The little girl with the bright smile, who had been lured away with the promise of a cheeseburger, had been brutally murdered. A subsequent autopsy would reveal the horrific details of her final hours. She had been raped, tortured, and strangled to death. The crime was not just an abduction, it was an act of unimaginable cruelty. Donald James Smith, the predator who had slipped through the cracks of the justice system, had inflicted the ultimate violence on an innocent child. His arrest was no longer just about kidnapping, it was now a capital murder case. The legal journey to hold Donald James Smith accountable for his horrific crimes was long and arduous, but the pursuit of justice was relentless. His trial finally began in February 2018, nearly 5 years after Cherish's murder. Smith pleaded not guilty to the charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual battery. The prosecution, led by State Attorney Melissa Nelson's office, came to the courtroom prepared with an overwhelming amount of evidence. Their goal was not only to secure a conviction, but to ensure that Smith would face the ultimate penalty for his actions. The trial was held in Duval County, where the community had waited years for this moment of reckoning. During the trial, the prosecution presented a mountain of irrefutable evidence. The jury saw the chilling Walmart surveillance video of Smith leading Cherish out of the store. They heard the frantic 911 call from her mother. Prosecutors presented DNA evidence found on Cherish's body that conclusively linked Smith to the sexual assault. Perhaps most disturbingly, the medical examiner testified in graphic detail about the brutal injuries Cherish suffered before she was strangled. The evidence painted a clear and horrifying picture of Smith's calculated cruelty. The defense team was faced with an almost impossible task, and in a controversial move, they chose not to cross-examine Rain Perrywinkle after her emotional testimony, a decision reportedly made at Smith's own request. The jury did not take long to reach a decision. After deliberating for only a matter of minutes, they found Donald James Smith guilty on all counts. The verdict was a moment of profound relief for Cherish's family and the community, a confirmation of what the evidence had so clearly shown. The trial then moved into the penalty phase, where the same jury would decide whether Smith should be sentenced to life in prison or receive the death penalty. The prosecution argued that the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, a legal standard that qualifies a defendant for capital punishment. They argued that the sheer brutality of the crime demanded the most severe sentence allowed by law. In May 2018, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty. A judge formally sentenced Donald James Smith to death, bringing the primary legal battle to a close. However, the legal process did not end there. Smith immediately began the lengthy appeals process that is automatic in capital cases. His lawyers have filed numerous motions, arguing issues like ineffective counsel during his trial and jury bias. In April 2021, the Florida Supreme Court upheld his conviction and death sentence. As of today, December 15, 2025, Smith's appeals are still ongoing, with his attorneys recently arguing before the state's highest court. Now 67 years old, Donald James Smith remains on death row, his legal challenges continuing as the justice system navigates the final stages of his case. The murder of Cherish Perrywinkle did not just cause grief. It ignited a firestorm of public outrage. The community in Jacksonville and people across the country were horrified not only by the brutality of the crime, but also by the systemic failures that allowed it to happen. The public learned that Donald Smith was a repeat sex offender who had been released from custody just weeks before the murder with no supervision. This fact was incomprehensible to many. People demanded to know how a man with such a violent and well-documented history could be free to roam the streets, let alone approach a family in a public store. The anger was directed at a justice system that seemed incapable of protecting its most vulnerable citizens from its most dangerous predators. The media coverage of the case was intense and widespread. Local news outlets in Jacksonville provided minute-by-minute updates, while national news programs, including my own on HLN, brought the story to a nationwide audience. The case became a symbol of the failures of the legal system regarding sex offenders. The haunting surveillance footage from Walmart was broadcast repeatedly, showing the world the face of both the innocent victim and the calculating predator. This constant media attention kept the pressure on law enforcement and lawmakers, ensuring that the questions about systemic failures would not be ignored. The outrage was not just an emotional reaction, it was a powerful force demanding accountability and change. Much of the community's anger was focused on the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and its handling of the initial hours of the investigation. The 6-hour delay in issuing the Amber Alert was seen as an unforgivable error. Many people believed that if the alert had been sent out immediately, Cherish might have been saved. An internal review by the Sheriff's Office confirmed that mistakes were made. The review led to disciplinary actions, including transfers and suspensions, for 2 supervisors and a dispatcher, who failed to follow protocol and recognized the case as an abduction. While these actions provided some accountability, for many, it was too little, too late. The trust between the community and law enforcement was shaken. The public's fury fueled a powerful movement for reform. Vigils and memorials were held for Cherish, but these gatherings were also rallies for change. Citizens, child advocacy groups, and victims' rights organizations began lobbying lawmakers, demanding tougher laws for sex offenders and improved law enforcement procedures. The community refused to let Cherish's death be just another tragic headline. They wanted her memory to be a catalyst for meaningful action that would prevent other families from suffering the same fate. This groundswell of public pressure was instrumental in forcing elected officials and government agencies to take a hard look at the broken systems that had failed Cherish Perrywinkle. The tragic death of Cherish Perrywinkle became a powerful catalyst for significant legal and procedural reforms in Florida. Her case starkly exposed dangerous loopholes in the state's laws governing sex offenders. In the years following her murder, lawmakers, driven by public outrage and the relentless advocacy of child protection groups, enacted a series of new laws designed to close those gaps. The Cherish Act and other related legislation were passed to ensure that dangerous predators like Donald Smith could not so easily slip through the cracks. These reforms were a direct response to the failures that allowed Smith to be unsupervised at the time of the abduction, creating a lasting legacy of protection in Cherish's name. The new laws brought sweeping changes. One major reform targeted the issue of post-release supervision, requiring many offenders to complete treatment programs before their probation could even begin. Lawmakers also extended the reach of civil commitment laws, which can keep the most dangerous sexual predators confined in treatment facilities even after their prison sentences are complete. This change was specifically designed to prevent situations like Smith's, where an offender could avoid this crucial review. Furthermore, new rules were implemented requiring offenders to register every vehicle they use and mandating stricter address verification checks by law enforcement. These measures were all designed to enhance monitoring and make it harder for predators to operate in secrecy. Beyond the legislative changes, the case forced law enforcement agencies to overhaul their own procedures. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, facing intense criticism for the 6-hour Amber Alert delay, completely revised its protocols for missing and abducted children. The new policy mandated a faster, more aggressive response to ensure that an Amber Alert could be issued within minutes, not hours, when a child is believed to be in danger. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which oversees the statewide Amber Alert system, also reviewed its procedures to streamline the process. These internal reforms were a direct admission of the failures in Cherish's case and a commitment to ensuring such delays would not happen again. Ultimately, the widest impact of Cherish Perrywinkle's case may be the heightened public awareness about the dangers of predators and the importance of vigilance. Her story served as a heartbreaking lesson for parents and communities everywhere about the reality of stranger danger and the deceptive tactics predators use. It underscored the importance of teaching children to be wary of offers from strangers, no matter how kind they seem. Cherish's memory lives on, not only in the laws that bear her name, but also in the continued conversations about child safety. Her tragic death forced society to confront uncomfortable truths and take concrete steps to build a safer world, ensuring that her legacy is one of protection for future generations of children.